Okay. Greenbrier. Yeah, I worked at the Church of Greenbrier for 11 years, and I grew up in Mammoth Spring. That's where I graduated. Yes, it is. Both of those methods. As I mentioned, I want to spend some time this hour talking about the idea of how do we develop and equip next generation leaders. And I'll tell you, I've asked this question to many different congregations and different elders. What are you doing to replace yourself? And it is so rare that congregations or leadership is actively involved in how do you get others ready to replace you. I mean, as much as I'd like to think that all of us are going to live forever on this earth, we all know that that's not going to happen. So what are we doing to get someone else ready to step into that role to become leaders in God's church for the future? Because what's going to happen is if we don't, there's going to be a generation that comes along that are not ready to be leaders, and the church is going to end up without them. And we're going to have to make sure that we're doing the things necessary to equip and develop those who are going to be next generation leaders. So this is my question. I want us to spend a little bit of time here before I share some thoughts with you. But what is needed to create that kind of culture where you develop and equip leaders within your congregation? Think about where you're at, your congregation. I don't know how many congregations are represented here, but I know there's several. But what would you suggest? What do you think is needed? Maybe some steps. What do you think is needed to create that kind of culture where you're developing and equipping others to lead? I would write them on a whiteboard, but I don't have a whiteboard. So
you got to nurture relationship.
Number one, I think you're going to have to nurture relationships. How do you do that?
Talk.
Okay. Got to talk. Communication. Means you don't keep things from the others. You can ask Bill about that later.
That was the inside joke. You walk up to a young man and you compliment him, a genuine compliment, whether it's something football or class, or you saw him do something good, and you're going to get his attention.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. Yes, sir.
I'm doing it. I have a movement at my house now.
Okay.
And every man for 2 weeks, about 2 weeks. I'm studying on how to change him from what he's been taught. And I, for the first time in a day or two, I've seen that change.
Okay.
And I say to do in front of it.
Okay.
What the Lord expects.
Oh, okay. Okay. So you're providing an example for him.
Right.
Okay. Very good.
Have you ever heard of the Ron Willingham leadership course?
I have heard of it, but just heard of it. I don't know much about it.
We did it many moons ago in Bamford, and then we did it many moons ago in Helena, Oklahoma. And what was interesting is you learn things about people that you didn't ever know, because they would get up and speak about things that they knew, but you didn't know they knew that or whatever. And it was very interesting how you interact afterwards,
Right.
because you learn so much about. They shared things that they were interested in, things that they knew how to do, what to do, and the interaction was great after that.
You're talking about just personal skills and abilities? And,
Yeah,
okay.
yeah, you learn about it.
Right.
And you'd see them at church, like you say, one would get up and maybe even teach a class, get up and lead a song or something. But you really didn't know anything about it.
Yeah.
You know?
It's about an 8 or 10 week program, isn't it?
Yeah,
I
it
went
was
through
several.
it years ago at Grapevine.
Okay.
And each night is a different subject that you deal with,
Yeah,
and it's really good program.
Good.
Yeah.
I'll have to look more into that.
it covered, like you had it once a week.
Yes.
Well, it was once a week, so you had time in between and everything.
Right.
Prepared for it. And, it was like a 10 or 12 week course.
Good, good. All right. What else? What would you suggest needs to be done?
I think first of all, we have to have a mindset of the congregation that we need leadership. You talked about the majority of congregations in our nation don't have elders.
Mhm.
Many of those congregations have become satisfied to not have elders and have a pastoral system where the preacher runs everything. I preach for one of those congregations. And I've been trying to impress upon them that while the church can function without preachers, they're handicapped, without elders, they're handicapped.
Yeah.
And every church that doesn't have elders needs to be moving toward that.
Yeah.
And if the congregation doesn't have that mindset, they're willing to just sit and let the preacher do what the elders are.
And you know, it's interesting you say that. That's the reason I chose the word culture, to create a culture for this kind of mindset, because it is a mindset. It's a culture that we have to develop and to get people to be aware of the need that exists and then start taking steps towards implementing those things that are going to do that.
To create a culture, you have to spend time with one another.
Yes. Yeah.
I think that's our biggest challenge right now. We have so many things that pull us in so many different directions. We don't know if our brother is in need. We don't know if they're having a good day, if they're having a bad day, if they're having a bad past few months. We have no clue. I feel like the majority of churches you walk into on a Sunday morning, everybody's out within 5 minutes of the closing prayer.
Yeah.
And I think that is where we truly, how can we build leaders if we don't even know one another? I feel like we just don't spend enough time with one another anymore. We have life pulling us in so many different directions.
Yeah.
That we can't even develop the beginnings of a relationship. Because how do you become trustworthy? That person has to have your phone number. That person has to know where you live. That person has to be able to call you and say, hey, I need some help.
Yeah. And
you be there every time.
Yeah.
We don't have relationships anymore, at least not abundantly, in my opinion. It's kind of a check the box. We show up and check the box. And
Yeah.
shake a few hands and go on down the road.
Yeah. So true. So true.
Create a positive atmosphere toward leadership.
You know, and I think this is probably one of the reasons that we do struggle in the church today to get people motivated. Of course, Kevin and I were talking about this idea of, you know, how do you motivate people to want to be a leader? And the thing that we were talking about is there's been such a negative view of someone who serves as an elder because they have to deal with all the complaints, they have to deal with all of the controversy, and they got to make all these decisions and so on. And I think sometimes even the way that we understand the role of a shepherd and the way that we view being a shepherd and not seeing the positive side of that has made a big impact. Back when I first started working with Sunset and developing this program, I spent, I don't know how many, I had the opportunity to go and interview some elders. I just wanted to ask them a bunch of questions that was going to help formulate some of the stuff that I was developing. And so I was working, actually had a friend of mine that got me in to interview some elders at the congregation in Fort Worth. And they had 12 elders, and I don't remember how big the congregation was, 600, 700 people. Anyway, I was just asking them, the last question that I asked was this one. I said, what have you learned since you became an elder that you wish you had have known before you became an elder that you could have prepared for? And I got two answers, one of which I think is why men don't want to be leaders, and the other is one that we need people to know. The first guy said, I wish I'd have known how long elders' meetings were going to last. And I said, that's one of the reasons why people don't want to be an elder. But the other guy sitting across the table, he said, you know, I wish I'd have known how many lives I was going to change. And I thought, that's what we need to be communicating. How many lives are we going to change in the role of being a shepherd, of being a leader, a leader in a class, just teaching, or even as a leader in our home or on our jobs? I mean, being a leader is about changing people's lives. And spiritually, as a leader, it's about changing their lives eternally. And so, seeing that positive side of that, I think makes a big impact. So we've got a lot of different ideas. What else? What else do you think, Bill? I do love you guys. You know that, right?
If I told them to embarrass them, that's okay.
Kevin's already got his head down. What's coming?
We have one Sunday afternoon a month, we have a time where the elders pray, and we pray for the members. Well, we started then during COVID, we started praying for our ministers. And then we started praying for each other. And we would sit in these meetings after we'd gone through the members and their needs, and we would go one by one, and we would tell them what was going on in our lives. And it would be personal stuff. I mean, my daughter getting married, and moving to Dallas, and having some health issues. And then, after each of us has done that, we rotate how we pray for each other. And I can say this, if someone is praying for you, it's hard to be mad with them. I'm just telling you that, or if someone's going to share what's going on in your life and you're praying with them, it's hard to have division when a man has just prayed for your child.
Yeah.
Well, what we started doing then, during COVID and afterwards, we had an online prayer service, and we were asking 2 men from the congregation to help us each month. Well, we then took those 2 men and invited them into our monthly prayer meeting. So they got to see how we prayed for the members. And we would talk, we wouldn't give away private, personal stuff, but we would, Bob wants hair, and he's praying that we could, have him grow hair. And we'd talk about the things that went on in their lives. And then, so they saw how we cared for the member. Then we prayed for each other, and I'm kind of bossy, these guys say that, I just want you to know that. So I said, okay, you guys have to start, and you have to tell them, start talking about personal stuff. Well, these men that came into our meeting, it was shocking, probably 90% of them spilled their guts to us. We had a lot of crying, we had a lot of things going on, and then we, again, took a second, we prayed for each other. I might pray for Leon one week, I might pray for Kevin, I might pray for Ralph or Ron was in. And I think that showed these men what shepherds really do.
Yeah. Wow. Yeah.
How'd you get them to spill their guts?
No.
How did you get them to spill their guts?
Well, we
Open
started
up.
it. We started it. And I said,
Okay.
when they came in, we had assigned seats. And that way you had Kevin, man, Leon, man for the congregation for me, or how we did, and then Leon and Kevin always started, and they started, and they'd say, this is what's going on in my life, this is what's going on with my daughters, this is what's going on with my grandchildren, and you knew who you were going with, so you had to take notes. So usually Kevin and Leon would start. So by the time you were the new guy, it wasn't embarrassing.
Gotcha.
And some of the guys would not. But it was surprising, and I want to say 90% is not an inflated number. Talked about the things that were going on in their lives. And then, again, each person, you prayed for the person on your right. So we then have a prayer line, each one moving.
And I'd heard about this before, and so I kind of knew about it. And, the idea is you're creating a safe environment, but you have to do that first. You can't just say, tell us about what's going on in your life. But when they see you first and foremost, and not even asking them to, they just see you saying, this is what's going on in my life, and this is where I'm struggling, this, or this is what's going on with my kids and my grandkids. And they say, immediately they start thinking, okay, this is safe. This is a safe space. If the elders are sharing this with me, then it's safe for me to share with them. So they have to see it first. And I think that's what's so critical about this whole concept of how do we get others to do that, is they have to see it first. I think it's a great thing.
If it's said in this room, it does not leave this room.
That's right. Yeah.
And so far, everyone has followed that rule. But if you can say anything you want, it never leaves.
Except for the one that wanted hair.
Except for the guy who wanted hair. And I was hoping about the time he said that, Kevin would have gone, but he didn't. Kevin was the one praying for it. So. Yes.
I want to tell you that for the past 24 years, I've been trying to help out at the prison. I've been ministering to Ada. Her man was out there and he needed help. And so he came to me while I was in a restaurant business there in Patoka. And he asked me, would I help him? And I said, yes, I will help you on Sunday. He wanted me to go down on Sunday, go on Friday. And I said, if the prison will let my wife go with me, because that's the only day we have off in the restaurant, you know what it's like, if you ever been in it.
Yeah.
It's hard work. I said, that's the only time I can be with her and she can be with me is on Sunday, is when we get out of church. And if she can go with me, I'll spend that time out there with her out there. And so they did. So they went to prison, they did. So I've been there for about 24 years.
Wow.
Well, anyway, I found out the way that we come up with a deal, the way we make these people react to you. I have them to, whoever want to feel good about themselves. I ask each one of the people out there. I said, whatever you want to say, you can say it to us, or whatever you want to do in the act of God, you can do it. And I got them to talking out with one another like that.
Yeah.
I let 2 or 3 people get up and tell what they want to do. Pray or sing or what. And they're starting to do it, and my crowd has doubled
Wow.
by letting them feel like they're being needed.
Yeah.
God needs you. Get up and tell him about it. Tell us about it. What God can do for you if you just let it.
You know, I love that you shared that, because it's not just creating a safe space where people can speak, it's creating value
Yeah.
and giving them a sense of value and worth in God's eyes to do that kind of thing. I love that. And I want to share just a couple of things with you about this. You guys have all come up with great ideas. And I've developed what I think it's a biblical pattern. And I think it's very simple. I've studied a lot of different material and I've looked at a lot of different things. But to me, I don't think it's complicated. So I just narrowed it down to 3 steps. And I think there are 3 really simple steps that if we would follow these, and these 3 are going to incorporate what y'all have already said. So that's kind of interesting to me that you mentioned them. But I think each of these steps, if we would just do them, would make this process so much easier. And maybe at the end of this, what we're going to have is more that are equipped and developed to be leaders. And it starts very simply with this. It's just an invitation. You know, when you think about how Jesus did, what he did with people to develop them, prepare them, it started very simply with 2 words: follow me. And of course, Kevin and I have talked a lot about The Chosen. I don't know if you've ever seen The Chosen or not. 4 seasons are out, about to come out with the 5th. I'm telling you, I really love that series of shows about the life of Jesus. But I love how it emphasizes over and over and over, especially in the first season, this idea of follow me. It was just that simple, follow me. And you read that throughout the gospel accounts. That's what Jesus did. He just asked them, follow me. And when they would follow him, what took place was the building of a relationship. They shared life together. And of course, Bill talked about this, and several of you have already mentioned the same idea. But the whole concept of building a relationship and sharing life together is not just about me getting to know you. It's about you getting to know me. And what's interesting about Jesus and him sharing life with the apostles, Jesus already knew them. He already knew what was inside each of them. He knew their thoughts before they even thought them. But the thing that was interesting about the relationship of Jesus with the apostles was he spent that time so that they would get to know him. And I think that's the part that has to be first if we're going to develop and equip anybody to be a leader, is we're going to have to let them understand who we are. That we need to be transparent with people. We need to be open. Now, that doesn't mean that we're going to have to share all of our deep, dark secrets from 40 years ago. But what it means is that we're going to have to be at least open enough with people to let them see the things that are going on in our life. Maybe it's things that we're challenged by, things that we struggle with. Maybe it's temptations that we have. I don't know. But we're going to have to at least build a relationship that's based first and foremost on us being open with the people that we're trying to lead and build that relationship with. It's not always about, well, let's sit down and tell me about yourself. Okay. Well, I went to college at Searcy. I went to Bear Valley. Then I went to Full. Married. Got 3 kids. Anything going on in your life? No, doing pretty good. I mean, we're not going to. We're not going to open up to people that we don't know and we don't trust. So we have to be the first to create that environment. And you know what happened with Jesus? Before there were 12, he had a lot of followers, but there were 12 that he selected and invited them into being an apostle. Do you remember what he did right before he invited them into that particular role? Kevin, say it.
He prayed.
He prayed all night long. In Luke chapter 6, in verse 12, it says he prayed all night long. And then the very next thing is he invited those 12 men to be apostles. When's the last time you prayed? All night long. About leaders in your congregation. About those that you might invite into a relationship to where you would equip and develop them to be leaders. In fact, let me ask it this way. When's the last time you've heard a public prayer from the pulpit asking God to provide men, to see the men that you might invite into developing to be and equipping them to be leaders? Has anyone ever heard that from the pulpit? I turned 63 in August. And in my 63 years of life, I've heard it 7 times. The first time I heard it, I was 60. And I made this statement to the group of people I was with, I've never heard it in my life. Well, somebody decided that day I was going to hear it. So that was the first time. The second time I heard it was when I said, in my 60 years of life, I've only heard it once. Until somebody decided I was going to hear it a second time. And the third time was when I said, in my life, I've only heard it twice. And you know how this is going. Yeah. It only happens when I tell people, this is how many times I've heard it in my life. It should be something we're praying about not only in our personal lives every day, but it should be something that's part of every public prayer. If we're hurting in the church when it comes to leadership, why are we not praying about it? Now, I'm not going to try to take James out of its context, but I do think it's very interesting that James said, you do not have because you do not ask. Why aren't we asking? But I think it's more than that. And I really appreciate the fact Bill said what he did about what they've been practicing there. Because when I think about this invitation into this relationship, you're sharing life together, and we have spent a lot of time together, all of these 3 men over here, and Kevin and Leon and Bill, I've known them for a number of years, and we've spent a lot of time talking about a lot of different things. In fact, if you go on the website, you're going to see a video clip where I interviewed them talking about salt, and I'm still trying to find that one on prayer. But anyway, the thing that we've had the opportunity to talk about is this idea of prayer and how important prayer is in being a leader, in the heart of being a leader. And I think that one of the most important things when we look at the life of Jesus and what Jesus did was the apostles came to him and they asked him, teach us to pray, as John taught his disciples how to pray. And he did. So what are we doing? I think it's just maybe a foundational piece, a starting point for us, that when we're thinking about these individuals in our congregation, that maybe we're wanting them to be leaders in the future or to equip them and develop them. Why don't we just start with that? Why don't we invite them into our home and let's start praying together and praying for each other? So I really appreciate Bill saying that, what he did about what they're practicing, because I think it's such a key thing. Is a lot of times you can tell a lot about a person's prayer life by the way they pray in public. And if their prayer in public is based upon repetitive phrases that we've heard for the last 75 years, and you know what I'm talking about, if that's the way they're praying in public, then I can just about assure you that their private life is not much different. So how are we teaching them to pray? To be transparent before God, to open up and have a conversation with God, and not just go through this ritualistic formula of the way that we start and the way that we end. Are we teaching them how to pray? You know, the word prayer, or the idea of prayer and prayers that we read about, it's about 250, a few over 250 that are found in the Bible. And do you know that outside of Jesus talking about how we address God in prayer, that there's not a single prayer found in the Bible that begins and ends the same way? And I've not seen one yet that ends with, and forgive us of our sins in Jesus' name, amen. Read Paul's prayers. Paul's prayers gives us some pretty good insight. Read the prayer of Jesus in John chapter 17. That'll give us some pretty powerful insight. One of my favorites is Elisha. Remember when his servant came in? Said, we're surrounded. And Elisha's prayer was just simply, Lord, open his eyes that he may see. And I'm telling you, a lot of times that's what I ask for myself. I just need the Lord to open my eyes so that I can see more clearly. But are we teaching people how to pray? You know, I think if we're going to develop and equip the next generation, I think it just starts right here. Very simply, an invitation. Invite them into a relationship and start sharing life together. That means that you're spending time together. You're not just on Sunday morning saying, how are you doing? And even just, well, let's just go to lunch. I'm talking about sharing life together. Are you involved in their family? Are they involved in your family? Spend time together. Might be surprised what we learn. But here's the thing. It's going to take time to do that. We're going to have to be the one committed enough to take the time to do that. And I appreciate what you shared earlier. We filled our lives up so much with busyness and stuff going on, we think we don't have the time. And we're going to have to make it. Now, the second part of this, the second step in this is very simply that we're going to have to model it. And some of you talked about that in various ways. But we're going to have to model it for them. You know, you talked about you having them in your home and you're living it out before them. And modeling for them what leadership is all about is a critical piece of this. And of course, that's what Jesus did. You remember in John chapter 13. He got up from the table, took a basin of water and a towel, and he began to wash the disciples' feet. That was not what they expected. And you remember when he comes to Peter. Peter's like, Lord, you wash my feet? Never. Never shall you wash my feet. And Jesus said, if I don't wash your feet, you've got no part of me. And Peter was at least aware enough to say, well, not just my feet, but my head and my hands. Just bathe me in it, you know. And then Jesus asks a very interesting question. Do you know what I've done to you? I love studying the questions of Jesus. I mean, Jesus asks a lot of questions in the Scriptures, and they're all very good, just a study in and of themselves. But here he asks, do you know what I have done to you? I mean, it's pretty apparent they didn't have a clue. Do you know what I've done to you? You call me Master, Lord. You call me Teacher. and so I am. If I then, your Lord, your master and teacher, washed your feet, you ought to wash one another's feet. For I have given you an example that you should do as I have done to you. I don't know if you've ever thought about this or not, but that's the only time in the gospel accounts that Jesus himself said, I've given you an example that you should do as I've done to you. Now, I find it fascinating that Jesus did not say, I've given you an example of how to go out here and preach the gospel. Go do that. He didn't say, I've given you an example of how to do many mighty miracles. Go do that. He didn't say any of that. I've given you an example of how to wash feet. Do that. Anyone in here ever done that? I mean, a legitimate, not because my wife needed her feet washed, she couldn't reach them or something, but I'm talking about legitimately, from a spiritual connection, wash someone's feet. One.
In my early walk as a Christian, when we did that, that was the most humbling and honorable experience I've ever gone through.
You know, I've only done it one time. I had the same experience.
Just
We were actually a part of a missions team up in Prince Rupert, British Columbia, and we were attending a church camp up in Alaska. And one year I found out they'd invited some denominational guy to speak that year, and I was like, we're not coming. And so I just called the guy that was kind of over that and said, we're not coming. And he was like, why not? And I said, well, because I'm not going to bring these kids up there and have to unteach everything that you're going to fill them with while we're up there. And so anyway, I said, appreciate it, but we're just not coming. So we got off the phone. Well, he called me back a couple days later, and he said, y'all need to come. And he said, we've told the guy he's not coming. And I'm like, well, I didn't intend for you to do that. You can do what you want to up there, but I just want you to know we're not coming up for that. And so ultimately what happened was he said, you're going to have to speak. And I'm like, no, I didn't intend that either. He said, doesn't matter, we're too late in the game. We've got to have somebody, so you got the job. And I'm like, great. And so based on the theme, this was the text of one of those lessons. And so I washed his feet. Now, he wasn't Judas to me, but it sure made me think about Jesus washing the feet of Judas. And it really was one of the most humbling experiences of my life. Now, I did this out at Red River. You remember here in that class when I made reference to that? I said, now, the thing I talked about in the class was that I know that Jesus is not teaching us to literally wash feet, but rather that we're to be servants of one another. And a guy in the class said, how do you know that? And I'm like, I don't guess I really thought about it. He said, well, if it's the most humbling thing in your life you've ever done, how do you know that's not what Jesus is trying to teach you? And I thought, I don't know that. That's a very good question. But however we want to approach this text, I think it has to tie directly into not just this concept of humility, but to think about it from the standpoint of love. When you get to the end of chapter 13, it's very, very significant that we recognize that what happens is that Jesus says, a new commandment I give to you, that you have love for one another, as I have loved you. And then he says, by this all men will know that you are my disciples, and that you have love for one another. Isn't it interesting that Jesus says the mark of your testimony of being a follower of me is the way that you treat each other? And so we have to ask ourselves, how are we treating each other? I mean, if we're constantly fighting and bickering and we can't get along and can't agree and talking about each other behind our backs and doing all those kinds of things, how on earth are we exemplifying humility and love? And imagine the impact that has on people that we're trying to develop and equip to be a leader, whether that's our children or that's other members in the congregation. Because if we invite somebody into this relationship and we're sharing life together, every word that we say and everything that we do is being watched by them. Are we modeling for them this example of being a servant? a servant of others. You know, far too often what I've seen in many congregations is that elders are more like CEOs who are managing the daily operations of the church. And I think a lot of times people don't want to be a part of that. They don't want to be an elder because they don't want any part of that. And I think it's sad because that's not what elders are to be doing. That's not their job, to be managers of the daily operations of the church. So when we think about this idea of modeling, you know, there are a lot of different styles of leadership. You know, there's kind of the coercion style, and it's like, follow me and I won't hurt you. You know, that kind of thing. And then there's the reward style of leadership. It's like, follow me and I will reward you. You know, your life's going to be better if you follow me. Or, you know, that kind of positional. You're going to be in the right place if you follow me. And the list goes on and on. But those are just transactional styles of leadership. But a truly transformational leadership is really based on this idea of serving others. Several years ago, I don't know if you know who Patrick Lencioni is or not. Patrick Lencioni started a leadership group called the Table Group. And what they do is work with corporations across the country in leadership development. But he was being interviewed one time, and they were talking about this idea because he believes that leadership is about being a servant. But he was asked in connection to being a servant leader, that terminology, being a servant leader. And he said, there's no such thing. He said, if you are a leader, you are a servant. You're either serving yourself or you're serving others. There's no such thing as a servant leader. If you're a leader, you're a servant. You just have to decide, who are you serving? Are you serving others or are you serving yourself? And of course, the only way that we can model for people what Jesus intended was not that we're about serving ourselves. It's about serving others. It's seeking what's best for them. That's what God intended. That's what Jesus taught. I mean, how many times did you see the apostles arguing over who's going to be the greatest? We want to sit on your right and on your left. And Jesus told them constantly, you know, the one who wants to be first among you is to be the servant of all. The one who wants to be greatest must be the slave of all. Well, that totally upended their whole world. That's not what they understood about leadership. I mean, their leadership example, like ours today, was the world around them. Lording it over people. I mean, you think about the apostles, that's kind of what they were thinking. We're going to sit on the 12 thrones of Israel and we're going to rule. Jesus, that's not his model. What he modeled for them was being a servant. And John 13 exemplifies that. I think that's the model that we have to follow today. And we're going to have to set that example before others if we're going to help equip them and develop them to be leaders for the future of the church. The third step is very simply training. So we've invited them into a relationship and we're modeling for them. We're before them all the time. But there has to be training. Now, training takes two forms. First of all, the idea of training involves instruction. Obviously, you know, if people are going to be trained to do something, you're going to have to instruct them in what to do. And Jesus did that. He instructed the apostles in everything that they needed to know to lead his people. Now, what's interesting about instruction is there is both formal instruction and there is informal instruction. Obviously, when we look at the Sermon on the Mount, we look at the parables, we look at the teaching about the temple, all those major teaching sections that we read about in the Gospel of Matthew, that was formal teaching. That's like, sit down and listen, I'm going to be talking for a while. And so it was formal instruction. But Jesus also taught informally. For example, this is one of my favorites. Do you remember when Jesus and the apostles were on their way to Jerusalem and Jesus was hungry and there was a fig tree? And so he went over to see if there was anything on the tree because he was going to get something to eat. When he got there was no fruit on it, even though it was showing leaves like it was in season. And so Jesus cursed the tree and it withered and they went on to Jerusalem. Well, the next day they come back and Peter saw the fig tree withered up and he remembered. And he points out to Jesus, look, the fig tree that you cursed is withered up. It was an object lesson for Jesus to teach the apostles about the power of a prayer in faith. Wasn't a long, lengthy discourse about prayer. It was just, if you pray in faith, believing that you have received it, you will get it. Very simple. And we're going to have opportunities like that. They're just simple object lessons by which we can teach people things on the fly. It's not sitting in a classroom. I always appreciated the statement that leadership development is not a class you take. It's not a course you develop, but rather it's an intentional relationship that you build. And in that relationship, you're going to have opportunity to teach people. Both formally, set in a classroom, but more importantly, informally, when you're just sharing life together. There are going to be things that happen that give you an opportunity to talk about prayer. I have a friend of mine in Louisiana that recommended a book recently called The Power of Prayer and the Prayer of Power. And I thought, that's kind of an interesting title. I mean, we know James 5, the fervent prayer of a righteous man works much or accomplishes much, or the working prayer of a righteous man accomplishes much. And so when we think about this idea of, do we have the kind of faith that when we pray, that we expect God to do something? Or are we just talking? I mean, when we pray, do we expect God to act? Do we trust Him to act? Well, I think it's important that when we're training people and instructing them, whether that be about prayer or about having a greater knowledge of God's Word, that what we need to do is teach them formally, but also teach them informally. Now, from a formal perspective, again, I recommend you go to the website. There are 120 lessons on there that you can use formally in a Bible class to teach. But I'll tell you, the most important lessons in my life are not those learned in a classroom. The most important lessons in my life that I've learned have been object lessons that somebody has taught me in a moment of need. Washing feet. I had an elder tell me one time, a situation occurred in my family. I didn't know how I was going to handle it. He said to me, the way you handle this will determine their eternal life. Eternal life. Their eternity. Well, that makes a big difference in the way you approach things, you know? When you start thinking that the way I handle this is going to determine the eternity of my family. Object lessons. Sometimes those are the most powerful. I had a preacher friend of mine that told me before I ever went to Bear Valley, he said, you know, what you're going to do out there is going to be a great thing. He said, and I like the fact you're going out there to learn how to be a preacher. But he said, I want you to remember this. If you get out there and you realize that that's not for you, it's okay. Come home. But he said, remember, you can save the whole world. But if you lose your family, it won't be worth it. Save your family first. Now, those are lessons you don't get in a classroom. Those are one-on-one conversations with people that can help change your life. Training involves instruction. And then the second part of this is it involves experience. You know, when Jesus, he gave the apostles opportunity to experience leadership. You remember when he sent the 70 out on what we call the limited commission? And they went out in pairs and they came back and they were rejoicing over the fact that even the demons were subject to them in the name of Jesus. And so all this stuff is going on. And why did Jesus do that? Why did he send out those 70 to do those things? He's giving them an opportunity to experience ultimately what they were going to need to know when it came to carrying out the Great Commission, as we know it. Now, it's challenging sometimes to let go when it comes to giving people an opportunity to have experience. Say, hey, I want to put you in charge of this, and you take care of it. And the question that oftentimes get asked is, well, what do you do if they fail? I said, that's the wrong question. It's not about if, it's what do you do when they fail? Because they're going to fail, and sometimes I almost think we ought to set them up for failure. Because they're going to learn more from the failure than they will from just having one success after another, and that we only set them up to succeed. You see, we got to give them an opportunity to have that experience, and then to understand that when they fail, it's okay. Because we've all done it. Anybody in this room never failed? We all have. And I'll tell you personally, I learn more from the failures than I ever do from the successes. And so I think it's very important that we got to figure out how do we respond when someone fails, because you know as well as I do that there have been people, especially young people, that get up to lead a prayer or to give a little devotional talk, and they're going to say the wrong thing. And there's somebody in the congregation, I started to say old codger, but there's going to be somebody in the congregation. I got to look at the context here. There's going to be somebody in the congregation that goes up to them and just rips their head off because they said the wrong word. You said pastor, we don't have pastors here. What does that do to that individual? They're done. You're not ever going to get them to do anything. Guess what? Because I'm not going to go through this again. How do we respond? Well, we got to get people experience. I always encourage people to let your young people plan their own youth rallies. Don't plan it for them. Let them plan it. Let them decide who they want to bring in. Give them a budget on how much money they have to spend and who's going to provide the food, how long is it going to be, what date's it going to be, how are you going to take care of the speaker that comes in. Let them plan it. They're going to learn more by doing that than if you do it for them. And all they got to do is show up, and they're going to take a lot more ownership in being there because they planned it. And guess what? When they make a mistake, how do you handle that? Well, you come alongside and say, well, let's figure out what went wrong, let's do it again. But you got to keep giving them experience. Start small and build up. And the more you give them, the better they're going to get at it. And ultimately, they're going to be a great leader. But we got to give people experience. So it's just a 3-step process. Invitation, model, and training. Those 3 ideas are so simple, and yet it's a biblical pattern that Jesus followed. And if we would do the same, we'd be surprised how we could develop and equip the next generation to lead. Invite them into a relationship, model for them, and then provide the training, instruction, and experience. And if we'll do those 3 things, we'll be surprised at the difference that it will make in how we're preparing and developing the next generation. They told me I could go all as long as I wanted. And I'm not a fan of Q&A, but I would be glad to spend a few moments. If you have some questions or thoughts you want to share, I'm glad to do that, to talk about whatever might be on your mind, or if you have questions about anything. Kevin?
This may be a historical thing, but do you believe the development of buildings in which to meet had such a detrimental effect on the relationship of people? I just, the more I look at it, the more I see the trouble that a building presents, because...
Are you still recording?
Please record. Early in the church's life,
300.
it was house to house.
It changed at 300. Constantine, when Christianity became a national religion, he started building buildings for churches to meet in, and everything changed.
And the invention of cement, for crying out loud.
Well, and this is,
situation.
I'm not trying to say it's right or wrong to do it one way or the other, if I can be politically correct in this political season. But the thing is that far too often, the bigger a congregation becomes, the less we know one another. The less we have intimate relationships. Or we develop what oftentimes we get criticized for, and that is we have cliques. And I heard a guy say one time, he said, my hands, they're a lot alike. They do stuff together all the time. They hardly ever touch my feet because they're not the same. But I guarantee you, if I stub my toe in the middle of the night, guess what my hands are going to do? They're going to grab a hold of that toe, and they're going to try to massage it to kind of get some feeling back into you. That kind of thing. Well, in the church, guess what? You're not going to see me hanging out with the teenagers. It's just not going to happen. Now, it doesn't mean that I don't say hi to them. I mean, I've got 4 grandkids that I live with. And so it's not that I don't say hi to the teenagers at church because they're hanging out with my grandkids and they're always saying, hey, Papa. But the thing is, we don't spend time together because guess what? One, I don't understand their language. You know, they start talking about, oh, that's so fire. And I'm like, what? You know, fire in my day meant a whole different thing than it means today. And bussin', I'm like, I guess that's really good. Oh, yeah, that means the food's great. And I'm like, bussin'. Why don't you just say the food's great? You know, I don't understand the language. My favorite is skibbity toilet. I'm like, what on earth does skibbity toilet mean? You know? And it's just that kind of stuff. And young man back there's like, that dude, what is he talking about? But the thing is, I tend to gravitate towards people who are like me, people who have grandkids. You know, we've got a lot in common, so we spend time together. Or leaders, older guys who are serving in leadership in some way. That's the kind of people I hang out with. Now, it doesn't mean I don't ever speak to or get along with others, but those are the people that I gravitate towards. And it doesn't mean that I'm cliquish. It just means those are the people like me. And guess what? Young people don't tend to come around me and hang out much with me either. They hang around people that they get along with, that they understand and they connect to. Well, young families are the same. People who have small children are probably going to gravitate more towards people who have small children than they are around folks that don't, because they want to be around people who understand what they're going through. It doesn't mean that it's right, wrong, or indifferent. That's just kind of the way we are. And it makes sense. Now, and I get the fact that we need to do some intergenerational things as the church to where we're connecting more with each other, and that's great if we can do that, but the bottom line is it's probably not going to happen very much. But it doesn't mean that we can't get along and work together in the church. Now, how do we get to know each other better? Spending time together in homes. Because a church building does kind of change that dynamic. And a part of that is because there's an expectation that's created once we come through the doors. There's a certain way that we conduct ourselves once we come in and we sit down in this building. And that expectation doesn't lend itself to intimacy of relationships. And so the only way that we're going to be able to build those kind of relationships is going to have to take place outside this building and figuring out how do we do that. And so in answer to your question, has the building concept and that model hindered us? I think yes. But I've also, my son-in-law and I have talked a lot about this idea of the church of the first century, because people say, well, we just need to go back to doing things the way they did in the first century. Well, yes and no. I think there are some things that we need to go back and do, but the bottom line is it's a different culture. The culture in the first century isn't the same culture we live in today. And so to say that we shouldn't have buildings and we ought to meet in homes, I don't think that's accurate either. I think it kind of depends on where you are, because there are some places that model might work really well, but there are some places it won't work. There are a lot of places that people think if you're meeting in your home, you're a cult. And they don't want to be a part of a cult. But there are some places I think that the house church model is very effective and could be something very effective. But at the same time, it doesn't mean that having a building in which we meet in, like a synagogue in the first century, that wasn't always wrong either. And so we've just got to find a way to build greater relationships apart from the building, because we've kind of designated and created the expectation that this is a place to where our focus is going to be on worshiping God. And so, and I think that's great too. We're going to do that. But ultimately, if we're going to build more intimate relationships, it's going to have to take place on a different level, a different place. How was that for politically correct answering your question? Any other thoughts or questions? Yeah.
I saw something here a while back. I thought it was really neat. It was about a family, and it was a large family. And they got together every evening. They always ate their home evening meals together. But the father would ask the kids, said, what did you fail at today? Did you hear that?
Angela Duckworth wrote a book and mentioned her father did that.
Yeah. you know, a lot of them say, well, tell me, what did you accomplish there?
Yeah.
What great
What
thing
did you fail at?
What did you fail at?
And he was disappointed if they hadn't failed.
Yeah, and they would discuss it and
Yeah.
help them whether they need to proceed or not.
Yeah.
You know?
What an interesting dynamic to create in a home or in a church, you know, be talking about what you failed at this week. How can I help you? You know? Be interesting.
Well, there's one other thing I want to mention.
Yeah.
For the body of the church, you know, the scriptures talk about giving the elders double honor. And a lot of people don't know how to do that. Just don't know how to do it. But the relationship has a lot to do with it. That's where the double honor is.
You know, and I meant to mention this earlier because we were talking about, you know, how things have changed. Do you remember when, of course you remember, when the pandemic hit? Now, I don't know about the congregation you're at, what happened, but in most congregations, the people that I was talking to, what elders were doing is they were dividing up the members in the congregation among themselves, and they were calling them every week. And they would rotate around, you know, like you take this group this week, you take this group this week, and then they would rotate around so that the members of the congregation heard the voice of their shepherds on a weekly basis. And by the end of the month, they'd heard from all of the shepherds. And so they were doing that kind of thing. And I don't know that there has ever been a time that we were more connected as shepherds to the sheep than during that time.
Wow.
And what happened is when we came out of the pandemic, guess what? We started meeting in the building, we stopped calling. And I couldn't help but think, you know, that's where we fell down right there. We should have continued to do that same thing. Just calling, let them hear the voice of the shepherd every week and say, how are you doing? Things going okay? Is there anything we can help you with? But see, once we kind of got back to being independent and we weren't in need because we weren't confined to our homes and people could get out on their own, we stopped staying in touch with the members. And we would talk to them at the building. And I think we need to go back to that. I think we need to go back to calling people on a weekly basis and just asking them, how are you doing? Just touching base, want to see how things are going. And then if they weren't at services, ask them why they weren't at services. Or just say, hey, you know, it was good to see you Sunday. Just want to touch base. How are things going? Does it take time? Yeah. It takes time. But will it make a difference? My son just became the president of Herald of Truth. And he called me the other day, and he is handwriting personal thank you notes to all these different people that have been connected to either sponsoring financially or helping in some way. And he said, my hand is worn out. And I said, but I'll tell you what, it's going to have a far greater impact on the future of that organization, you doing so. Because you're connecting with people. When they know that you took the time to personally handwrite a thank you note to them, that's a connection that you can't get any other way. Because that gives value to people. They know that what they're doing is valuable because you noticed and you thanked them for it personally. And so, you know, just doing those things. Now, I'm going to brag on these three men over here because I know them better than I do anybody else. We've spent a lot more time together than anybody else, but during the year of the pandemic, on Easter, instead, they weren't able to have their Easter egg hunt for the kids, you know, out in the park kind of thing. So what they did was all three of them and their wives put together Easter eggs, and they went and hid the eggs in every family that had kids, hid the eggs in their yard, and left a note for them to find those eggs so they could do their own little Easter egg hunt at their own home. Now, what do you think that said to those families? And then, for Mother's Day, they hand wrote Mother's Day cards to every mother in the congregation. They even sent one to my wife. What do you think that told my wife? What do you think it said to the mothers in that congregation? That the shepherds would personally handwrite a note to every single lady in that congregation that had kids. Are we connecting with people? That's what shepherding is all about. I mean, when Bill calls me and asks for help or to come and do stuff, my wife never says, are you going again? She loves those men. Are we connecting with people? Because when we're connected, folks will follow. When we're not connected, they see no value. So spend the time. It takes time, but it's worth it. Makes a difference.
I try to tell all young preachers, get connected to the widows.
Any of the older ladies, period.
Because when you make a mistake that's worthy of being fired,
Yeah.
or whatever, causing trouble, those ladies will come to your defense every time.
Yeah. Yeah. I just classified all the older ladies in the congregation. Yeah. Yeah. Make friends with the older ladies. They're going to take care of you. That's so funny. But it's true. It's
They'll
true.
have you a snack.
They'll have you a snack. That's right. Yeah, that was my favorite thing about Greenbrier. I'd always go out and visit, and I got fed very well in Greenbrier. They took good care of me. Those ladies, they really did. They were so funny. Yeah.
I would go mow the lawns for a lot of the widow ladies and widow men too. And if they didn't have a dessert, really, they'd make one while I was mowing the lawn.
Yeah.
Did you go home with, after eating 15 pieces of pie?
I didn't eat much at home.
Any other thoughts?
I think, one thing that would be beneficial is for elders in churches to study a literal shepherd.
Yes.
And the kind of work that they do. And
yeah,
my son sent me a book, and it was called "They Smell Like Sheep."
Yeah, Lynn Anderson has 2 volumes, actually, 1 and 2. They're both good.
I mean, it spent a lot of time just talking about shepherds, what they do, and
Well, and I would
Who
recommend
was that author?
Lynn Anderson. He's since passed away, but both those books, volume 1, volume 2, are good. And I'll tell you another book that I don't know, I had it on my shelf for the longest time. And before I ever read it, when I read it, I was like, why have I not read this before now? It's by Ian Fair, F-A-I-R's last name, and it's Leadership in the Kingdom. Yeah, have you read it?
No, but I know the man.
Okay.
I know of the man.
Well, the book is amazing. It's Leadership in the Kingdom, and in fact, those 3 books are 3 that I recommended to the elders at Burns that I've been working with them, and so I get tickled. They're all coming in every week. It's like, I've read about 100 pages, and I'm like, okay, let's talk about it. But that Leadership in the Kingdom, he has such a great perspective on what that role is and how that role plays out, and I just really appreciated that book. I don't know, is he still alive?
Are you talking about the South African?
No, I'm talking about the guy who was a professor at Abilene.
Oh, yeah, Ian Fair.
Yeah.
He was from South Africa.
Oh, is that right? I didn't know that. I've never met him. I just read the book. So I don't know anything about him. I just knew he was a professor at Abilene for a number of years. I don't know if he still is.
He's also known for teaching Revelation.
Is that right? Well, I can tell you that book, Leadership in the Kingdom, is on my shelf and one of my favorites. It's a great book, and I would like to meet him someday and talk about that. So
I do not know if he's still alive.
I don't either, but
I kind of
that book's worth reading. If you get a chance to order it, I would encourage it. So,
name of it again?
Leadership in the Kingdom.
Okay.
Yeah. Well, let's have a prayer. I know we're pushing up till 12 here, and some of you guys got a long drive home. But who's got the closing prayer? Is that you?
No, not me. I just had a quick
Okay.
question.
Yeah.
Quick question for you. Many churches, I believe now, I think you popped off the statistic, 65% of
Yeah.
people who are without eldership or with eldership?
Without.
Without eldership. And I'm currently in a congregation such as that. I think the majority of us probably are. When you're in those situations, how do you begin to even start? Because
That book I just mentioned would be the one I'd start with,
all right.
because he addresses that. He talks about the idea of congregational meetings and not men's business meetings, and talking about how they operate and how they kind of move forward towards trying to get men into position of being a leader to serve as a shepherd. So I would start with that book, number 1. And again, the website has a number of different lessons. I would encourage those 16 lessons by Tommy South on shepherding. Those lessons are really good, and they're very detailed. I mean, they're full outlines, like 5 or 6 pages each outline. And so there's a lot of great information there. He also recommends some books in that study. So I would encourage some studies like that. And it may be that it's not going to happen in the next 6 months or a year or 2 years. It may be training the next generation to get them ready so that when the time comes 10 years from now, they'll be ready to step into those roles, something like that. But that's where I would start.
Short term, I feel like the only avenue you have is to get the willing people together and
Well, and
deal
that's
with the consequences of those people not being, qualified
Yeah.
to be an elder, because I think there's reasons why there's qualifications for being an elder,
Sure.
your decision making, things like that. And if you have a collective group of men who aren't qualified to be elders and are making decisions for the church,
it's bad.
there's gonna be bad things that come from that. So it's almost like a rock and hard place, a catch-22. What do you do?
Well, in the early church, there were times the early church didn't have leadership, which is why they had congregational meetings. And that's what I like about what Ian brings out in that book, Leadership in the Kingdom, is he talks about there are going to be times where you don't have elders, and what do you do? And of course, the men's business meeting is not a biblical concept, but the idea of a congregational meeting is a biblical concept. And so he highlights that, talks about what that looks like. So I'd really recommend that book to be a starting point.
I know two congregations that recently installed elders, and I've heard the report of the good that has done
Yeah.
for the atmosphere and for handling situations. That's this congregation and Spur, Texas.
Yeah.
So reach for it.
Yeah, oh yeah. It really does make a difference. When you get the right men in to that role, it can have a huge impact on the direction of the congregation, for sure. Once again, I want to thank all of you for coming. I appreciate you being a part of the morning, and I appreciate Larry and the elders here for the invitation to be a part of this work. And I'm just encouraged every time I get to be around men who are focused and desire to learn and to grow into leadership. And so I appreciate that. And I appreciate all of you who've traveled it. I know that guys from Amber drove 3 hours down here, so I really appreciate that. I know they came for the breakfast and not the other, but that's okay. But and as you know, I love those three men greatly. And we've gotten to know each other really a lot over the last 5-6 years. And I appreciate who they are, appreciate what they do, and appreciate the encouragement they've been to me over the years and what I'm doing. So really
I like to
appreciate
have connection to be notified when that next one is going to happen.
Yeah, it's in September every year. This next year is September the 14th. Is that right?
It's right on this pin
Yeah.
right here.
But I know that, oh, he's got the pen. There you go. September the 13th, 25. Yeah. But I can't recommend that event enough. It is, they usually have 4 or 5 speakers, 5 lessons. But they have 5 lessons on that one day. It starts at 9. It's over by about 2:30, and so you can get back to your home pretty quick. But it is, I've been there every year except for 2. I think one year I had a death in the family, couldn't go. And then the other year I think was, first one I was out at Bear Valley for their lectureship. But anyway, I plan to be there every year, and I just really recommend it. It's such a great day. Some great information. I love the fact that the focus is not on the issues, but rather it's on about being a shepherd. It's about how do we point to the positive side of being a leader in the Lord's church, and what does that look like. So it's an encouraging day. And so I really encourage you to be a part of that, and to bring others in your congregation to be a part of that. And it's not just for, it's designed, the men who are speaking are either elders or former elders, and they're talking to men who are elders or in the future may be elders. It's not just for people who are already serving as elders, but it be an encouragement to those who maybe are thinking one day they might be. Even young men come to be a part of that, so that one day we encourage them. How many of you have really actively encouraged younger men to be elders one day? You know, a few have. But we need to do more of that. We need to be encouraging our young men to be thinking about one day you need to be an elder. Because I'll guarantee you, if we've got good shepherds in the future, the pulpit's not going to be an issue. Yeah, we just need to make sure we're focusing on that. So. But again, thank you. I appreciate it. It's a great, great honor to be here. So,
Thank you.
you have the closing prayer?
No.
Oh, okay.
Well, some comments.
Okay, I'll sit down.
Hey, it's been a great day. It really has. And on behalf of the elders here at Calera and the men here at Calera, we thank each of you for coming. We really appreciate you being here and taking the time to be with us. We had a great meal over there, but it won't compare to the spiritual feast we had. Thank you, Bob, for your remarks. We're going to have Chris going to lead us in a couple of songs, then we'll have our dismissal prayer.
I'll sing one last song, number 647. 647. Stand as we sing. Sing all 5 verses and we'll have our closing prayer. Soldiers of Christ arise, they put your armor on. Strong in the strength which strong in the strength which God supplies. Strong in the strength which God supplies through His beloved Son. Strong in the Lord of hosts and in His mighty power. Who in the strength of Jesus trust? Who in the strength of Jesus trust is more than conqueror. Standing in His great might, with all His strength endued. But take to our youth, but take to our youth for the fight. But take to our youth for the fight, the panoply of God. Lead to one guarded place, no weakness of the soul. Take every virtue, every grace. Take every virtue,